Okay. So anyway, first off, I want to reiterate just the very basic thing. Happy Mother's Day to all of you who are mothers. And I want to talk about my mother because she's a very special woman, and because there's a reason she's on this sign. She's right here. This is my mother right here, Hazel Lewis Curtis. My mother was, I would say devoutly religious, but she's religious in the sort of the kind of values that we're talking about here. Love your neighbor as yourself. Highest integrity. Don't ever lie. And she lived her life that way. And that's really what's most important about mothers, what they've done for us over the centuries. It's not that they get their names in the papers or things of that sort. It's the hard work that they do, carrying us for 9 months when we're little. They're the ones who are making sure that we have food and that we have a roof over our heads, and our every need is met. I mean, I can remember when I was a kid, I had rubella, and I was extremely sick with it, delirious and so forth. And who was it that I called for? It was my mother. And who came to take care of me? It was my mother, and those are the most important things. My mother was also a great listener. She was someone I could go to anytime I had a problem or just wanted to talk about things or share exciting things. But my mother wasn't just our family. She was very good in helping the disabled. There was a woman whose husband worked with my father that had MS. And my mother went over there and she would take her to the grocery store when she couldn't drive. And when she couldn't even go to the grocery store, she would go by the grocery store. And, as she deteriorated and she was almost bedridden and so forth, my mother regularly kept touch with her. And she lived for, 30 years or something like that. My mother helped the elderly. There's a woman I remember was with our church. And, when she retired, my mother would visit her regularly. And the woman lived to be 100 years old. My mother visited her the whole time until she died. My mother was very active in charities. One in particular, they had a hospital auxiliary. It was a women's auxiliary for the hospital. They ran a gift shop at the hospital. The proceeds, they worked no paycheck or anything like that. The proceeds went to help the hospital and the people there. So, all in all, my mother was, the epitome of a humble and kind person, just like my wife here, who actually just have 1/16 of my mother's DNA, but that's for another story. So anyway, I want to say thank you so much to my mother for all she did for me and everyone else, and thank you to all the other mothers. And I wish that's all I had to say about my mother, but there's something else I have to say. But I have to kind of introduce it by talking about some other things first. And this has to do with what are our objectives? What are all of our objectives? So what's the objective of life? So in the USA today, we're taught the objective of life is acquiring as much financial wealth as possible. We're great at this game as our wealth is second to none. Political leaders and businessmen compete daily to claim credit for this magnificence. So how is life here in Millionaire Estates? What's extraordinarily deadly with the world's highest drug and firearm suicide death rates, these are both major causes of death in the U.S., and much, much more. And all this drags our life expectancy down well below the developed countries that we consider our peers, who don't have nearly as much money in the stock market as we do. What's more, life here is actually better for those living in the chiefs, those living in countryside areas. Hispanics, who are the poorest of the three major ethnic groups in the U.S., live longer than non-Hispanic whites, who are by far the richest, thanks in part to much lower drug and firearm suicide death rates. Did you know that Hispanics die from firearm suicide 3.5 times less than non-Hispanic whites like us? So why is this? Well, you think about it, in a country that will do anything to make a buck, our wealth is what we are worth to others, dead or dispossessed. Our wealth actually makes us a lucrative target for deadly misinformation. So we're told the greatest danger to us is Hispanic immigrants. So we'll spend money on guns to arm the person who's most likely to kill us, ourselves. We're told fentanyl is a wonder drug because it reduces pain so well. So we'll spend lots of money to get the deadliest drug on earth. And on top of that, in a country that will do anything to make a buck, we are all cost to be minimized. And And that brings me back to the story of my mother. Okay, so my mother, not long after her 89th birthday, she fell at the assisted living facility where she lived on her way back to her room from dinner. It seemed pretty likely she'd broken her hip, so she was taken to the local hospital, which is run by HCA, which is the biggest for-profit hospital system in the world. Certainly in the United States, but I'm pretty sure in the world. Okay, so when she gets to the hospital, they ask her on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the worst pain that you have ever felt, which means it's a variable scale depending on who you're asking it, what is your pain? Okay, again, I'll point out that that's rather unfair. Somebody who's been in a major car accident and has broken many bones in their body, the worst pain they've ever felt is far worse than somebody who hasn't had that. But it has the scale, so, ask you on a scale of 1 to 10. So whatever number my mother gave them, they said, give her morphine. She said the number, the magic number. So what happens when you give an 89-year-old morphine for the first time? They throw up. What happens when an 89-year-old throws up? They aspirate into their lungs. And what happens when that happens? They get pneumonia. Okay, so she ended up in the ICU. And, the doctors who saw her initially, it's like, yeah, she's on her way out. There's not much we can do. But there was a pulmonary doctor who came in, and he could see that wasn't the case. He could help her. And he actually got her to improve enough that she came out of the ICU to a step-down unit. So it seemed like she was getting better. But then I went in one morning, and it was like she's totally out of it. And there were 2 hospitalist doctors there, I think were coronary and some other specialists. And then this older pulmonologist came in, and he starts looking at her chart. He says, she was given blah, 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 meaning I can't remember what he said. And then he said, old people don't do well on blah, blah, blah. So, meaning, for the second time, she'd been pharmaceutically abused in this hospital. But that wasn't the end of it. So the next day, we go into the hospital, and they say, it's time for you to talk to our palliative specialist. Okay? We think she should go in hospice because she has less than 6 months to live. But don't worry, we have a great hospice system. We have an in-house hospice here. If she wants food, we'll give it to her, and we'll make sure she has pain relief so she's not suffering. I felt a little suspicious because it was a little bit like a timeshare sales speech or whatever, but at that point, you trust the doctors to tell you what's the right thing to do. So, I leave her that night. She seems pretty lucid. She actually recovered from a few days before. And it's like, oh, she's going to be around several more days. And in the morning, I get a call from my sister that she had died while they were giving her a morphine injection that morning. So, again, I kind of suspect, things aren't quite what they are. Now, it happens that my ex-wife is a nurse, and she worked at that exact same hospital. And a couple of years later, she quit. And she told me why she quit. She quit because they were having care meetings, but they weren't really care meetings. They had the nurses come in there, but they had the accountants come in and say, oh, well, we're not getting reimbursed for that drug. Don't give them that drug. But they're also saying other things, like in the cancer ward, there are a lot of people that are terminal and so forth. They're pushing people to put them in their in-house hospice where they say, we want them all dead in 24 hours. So basically what happened is this hospital system conned me and my sister to sign my mother into the hospice system where they proceeded to give her a lethal injection. Okay? So why does that happen? Well, if you consider this hospital system is almost always in every insurance company's preferred network. Why are they in the preferred network? Well, they reduce the cost of the insurance companies. They get rid of patients like this who are liability. It helps them too because it cuts their costs. These patients may not generate much revenue for them. So that's what happened to my mother. So what's true is that we really do live in a country where business and political leaders will kill our mothers to make a buck for themselves. So what do we do about it? Well, what we do is what my mother did. We tell the truth to educate us all. So that's the rest of the story. So what is the real objective of life? Well, you just look at your soul, and you look at your self-preservation instinct you were born with, and it tells you that the objective of life is to keep ourselves healthy. Well, what's the next thing? What does your mind tell you to do? Well, it drives you to seek the life-giving truth of how we should do that. It's pretty straightforward. And then what do you do with that knowledge? Well, that drives us to love one another in every way, recognizing that the love we give is what we are worth to everyone alive. And becoming great at that game would make our health second to none. Now that would be truly magnificent. And I know my mother would want that for all of us. So I'm fired up and ready to go. How about you?
All right.